For a long time, there was a simple idea people believed in. If you worked hard, you'd be fine. Not rich. Not famous. Just stable. A house. A decent life. Some savings. That was the deal. And for a while, it worked. People followed the system. They went to school. Got jobs. Saved money. Built a life step by step. Slow. But predictable. But somewhere along the way, that deal started to change. Not all at once. Not in a way that made headlines. Just slowly. Quietly. In the background. At first, it was barely noticeable. Prices went up a little faster than usual. Rent became slightly harder to manage. Saving money took a bit more effort. Nothing extreme. Nothing alarming. Just different. But then it kept happening. Again. And again. And again. Until one day, people started to realize something. Working hard wasn't working like it used to. You could do everything right. Get the degree. Land the job. Show up every day. And still feel like you're falling behind. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because the system itself is changing. This isn't how things were supposed to work. The middle class was supposed to be stable. That was the foundation. Not too rich. Not too poor. Just secure enough to build a life. But that stability is starting to fade. Not disappearing overnight. Just slowly. Being stretched thinner and thinner. And the scary part? Most people don't even notice it happening. Because it doesn't feel like a sudden loss. It feels like a slow adjustment. A small compromise here. A delayed goal there. Until eventually, the life you expected looks very different from the one you're living. And by then, it's already normal. That's how shifts like this happen. Not with panic, but with acceptance. People adapt. They find ways to cope. They tell themselves it's temporary. That things will improve. That the system will correct itself. But what if it isn't? What if this isn't a phase, but a transition? A shift into something new. Something less stable. Something more uncertain. Because once the middle class starts to weaken, everything else changes with it. Spending slows down. Opportunities shrink. Pressure increases. And that pressure doesn't just stay in one place. It spreads. Across industries. Across jobs. Across the entire system. Which raises a bigger question. If working hard isn't enough anymore, then what is? Because the old rules don't seem to apply the same way. And the new rules? They're not very clear yet. Some people adapt faster. They find new ways to earn. New ways to grow. New ways to stay ahead. But most people are still playing by the old system. Hoping it still works. Even as it slowly changes around them. And maybe it will. Maybe things stabilize. Maybe the pressure eases. Maybe the middle class finds its balance again. But right now, that balance feels fragile. Like something holding on. But not as strong as it used to be. And when something becomes fragile, it doesn't always break immediately. But it does become vulnerable. To stress. To change. To unexpected events. So the question isn't just, is the middle class disappearing? The real question is, right pointing finger emoji, are we noticing it while it's happening? Because once it's gone, it won't feel sudden. It'll feel like it was always this way. And that's what makes it so hard to see. Until it's already too late. And within a few years, Japan entered what would later be called the lost decades. An entire economic era defined by stagnation. One currency shift helped change the trajectory of a nation. And policymakers everywhere were paying attention. But Japan wasn't the only country thinking about this. By the early 2000s, another country had become the world's factory. China. If you bought electronics, toys, furniture, clothing, or tools during that period, there was a very good chance it came from a Chinese factory. And once again, currency played a huge role. China tightly managed the value of its currency, the yuan. For years, The government kept it artificially low against the US dollar. The result? Chinese goods were consistently cheaper in global markets. Retailers in America and Europe loved it. Consumers loved it. But domestic manufacturers in those countries did not. The accusation was clear. China was manipulating its currency. By keeping the yuan weak, China was giving its exporters a massive advantage. Chinese officials rejected the criticism. But the strategy worked. China's exports surged. Factories expanded. Cities transformed almost overnight. Hundreds of millions of people moved from rural farms to urban manufacturing jobs. It was one of the largest economic transformations in human history. And currency policy quietly helped power it. Now here's the uncomfortable part. Almost every major economy has flirted with this strategy. Sometimes openly. Sometimes quietly. The term economists use is competitive devaluation. It sounds technical. But the idea is simple. If your currency falls, your exports become cheaper. If everyone's trying to export more, the temptation is obvious. Let your currency weaken. But if multiple countries try to weaken their currencies at the same time, something strange happens. No one really gains an advantage. Imagine 3 runners in a race. Instead of running faster, they all try to move the starting line backwards. Eventually the race looks the same. But everyone's standing in a different place. That's the weird paradox of currency competition. If everyone weakens their money, no one really wins. Yet countries keep trying. The tools used to do this are surprisingly subtle. One of the most powerful is interest rates. When a central bank lowers interest rates, borrowing becomes cheaper. Businesses borrow more. Consumers borrow more. Economic activity increases. But there's another effect. Lower interest rates usually make a currency less attractive to investors. What used to be a goal now feels like a luxury. Not because people stopped wanting it, but because reaching it feels further away than ever. Prices have risen far beyond what most people can afford. And even if you manage to save, it never feels like enough. Because the target keeps moving. Every time you get closer, it shifts again. And after a while, you stop chasing it the same way. Not because you don't care, but because it stops feeling realistic. Then there's the cost of living. It's not just one thing. It's everything. Food, gas, utilities, healthcare, basic everyday expenses. All slowly increasing. Not always dramatically, but consistently. And consistency matters. Because small increases, over time, turn into big pressure. And while all of this is happening, incomes don't move the same way. They grow slower. More controlled. More limited. Which creates a gap. A gap between what things cost and what people can actually afford. And that gap doesn't stay small. It grows. At first, people adjust. They cut back on unnecessary spending. They become more careful. More aware. They delay certain plans. Maybe a vacation. Maybe a purchase. Maybe something bigger. But eventually, cutting back isn't enough. Because there's only so much you can cut. And that's when people start looking for another solution. Not a permanent one. Just something to make things easier. For now. That's where debt comes in. Credit cards. Loans. Payment plans. At first, it feels helpful. Like a toolie. A way to manage things. A way to stay afloat. And for a while, it works. But over time, that tool becomes a weight. Because debt doesn't remove pressure. It delays it. And when you keep delaying pressure, it builds. Quietly. Just like everything else. At the same time, there's another side to all of this. A side that looks completely different. The market. Stocks go up. Companies grow. Valuations increase. And from a distance, it looks like everything is doing well. Which creates a strange contrast. Because on one side, people feel more pressure than ever. And on the other, things seem stronger than ever. And when those two realities exist together, it creates confusion. Because both can't fully represent reality. Something has to give. Either things are stronger than they look, or weaker than they seem. And that uncertainty is where the discomfort comes from. That feeling that something isn't right. Because deep down, people can sense imbalance.